Okay, so this is a an intervention really that I've developed over a few years. It began when I was teaching. A student brought in a handout that she had gotten at a workshop, and I kind of used the handout to accommodate to the class, and I began. I'm a social constructionist, so I began teaching by sitting in silence and having the students really take responsibility, take ownership for the class. And while it made them very nervous, it propelled the learning because they did the readings and it was very powerful. So then I began using it in my practice. And in my private practice, I see individuals, couples, and families. And so what I began doing is just suggesting that we try this. This kind of, I often will try new things with people. And I just said, would you be willing to try this? And I would run them through basic meditation guidelines, kind of breath work, and focusing on a meaningful mantra. And so we would kind of walk up the stairs to my office and sit for the first 5 minutes, in 5 or 10 minutes really, in total silence, meditating together, face to face. And what began to happen was people would, I always call it doorknob conversations. They would begin the session with their doorknob conversations. So it had the effect of, I think, organizing them and almost like bringing them right in very quickly. And the way I work, I think of the space in between me and the client as the space of really where the energy comes from in the session. I don't think I do it. I don't think they do it. I think together we cultivate this space, which I think of as kind of almost like a fire that we fan the flames of the energy of what we're creating together. And so the way it fits with systemic practice, I see families and couples as systems, and I see individuals as systems, and in the intervention together, we're kind of looking to the energies of the system, trying to soften the energies of the system so that they move perhaps to a different form. And so with systems, I'm always trying to perturb the system and kind of put it off balance, and trusting that it will find its own new balance, new place of homeostasis. And so meditation just speeds that up.
Were you influenced strongly by any particular school, like narrative or?
Well, it's interesting because I think I take a little bit from every school. I trained many years ago at a family therapy institute, and I was there for 6 years, so I did every single program they had. So they had Milan and narrative and structural and strategic and a little bit of everything. So who knows what I end up using? It's whatever comes in.
I've read some of your work, and I was really interested in this idea of this space between you and the client. And you've used some reference to Winnicott, haven't you? And the idea of the third place, or the shared space, the created space. But you've also brought this idea of the sacred into that. Could you say something about that?
Yes, I think of the space in between as kind of, Winnicott called it transitional or potential space. Relational intersubjective therapists call it the third, the analytic third. I think it's Ogden who talks about that. But it's a place that's not me and not my clients. And And, you know, I have even gone beyond that, but it's a space we co-create, which is a place where spontaneity can happen, play can happen, creativity is cultivated. And I go so far as to say that even the sacred comes in. Uh, uh, Jung talked about contacting the numinous, and when I'm sitting with people, I think of the practice of meditation as a spiritual practice, and I think of clients as seekers who are trying to find some answers that they don't have, that they haven't found in their worlds, and I don't have. And so we call on this energy that's who knows what it is. Divine intervention, which is kind of going a little far, but I do think that that's something that happens.
And do you think in the UK there's a lot of practice within the health service called the NHS, and there's this idea of things have to be very, very evidence-based and away from anything what's described sometimes as fuzzy, you know. So sometimes the esoteric,
yes,
is described as, oh, sorry, that's too fuzzy, we can't go there.
We call it fluffy.
You call it fluffy. So, I mean, there's also a great understanding that people's beliefs and their religious beliefs and their religious practices are integral to treating the person as a whole person. So there's this kind of fine balance between what is fluffy and what is really respectful. And so in terms of taking your model into UK mental health practice, how would it be possible to avoid the fluffy label of this idea that the client is a seeker in some way?
Well, I think people move it into the realm of mindfulness, which is a much more accepted and researched and understood way of thinking about. Well, actually, mindfulness is not really meditation, but meditation brings you to mindfulness. So John Kabat-Zinn is somebody who's pretty well known, who developed MBSR, and it's an evidence-based practice. He actually, I was at a conference with him a couple of years ago, and he talked about how when he began, that it was considered fuzzy pokey. And he actually went to MIT and was a scientist, and his advisor said, "You're crazy, what are you doing? You're going to ruin your career." And look where he is. So I think meditation is developing as an evidence-based practice. There's a lot of research happening where they're finding that meditation completely changes your neurology, and they're looking at depression and anxiety and all kinds of mental illnesses. And, you know, certainly it's been accepted that meditation changes your physical self for years and years and years, people who've had heart problems and whatever. I tend to be someone who thinks of my practice as not a science, but an art. And I always have a problem with, I shouldn't say this, but I talk about practice-based evidence rather than evidence-based practice. Yeah. Because I always feel like there are political pressures that come to bear on how the evidence is developed and how replicable it is, and there's so many issues about evidence. So it's kind of a catch-all phrase that's become very popular, and I think that this too shall pass.
In terms of John Kabat-Zinn's work working with depression, anxiety, and the kind of evidence of the effectiveness of that, I'm sure there's lots of evidence out there and lots of research being done in that way. But in terms of the bringing mindfulness to the couple dynamic, that's something very different, isn't it?
Yes, I think that it is, and in some ways, I think it can be almost much more powerful because there's an intimacy in the couple that exists before you ever meet them, and there's an intensity and Dan Siegel is somebody who's written an acronym called COAL, C-O-A-L, that has to do with meditation, and it stands for curiosity, openness, acceptance, and love. And one of the things I love about working with couples and families is no matter what's going on, there's an incredible amount of love in the family. And so it's a resource always, and the intensity is there already, and they might actually, my couples end up meditating together outside of the sessions, and so it deepens their relationship.
Great. And let me just have a little look at my sheet here. It's really interesting. I'm really enjoying what you're saying. So yeah, contraindications of using mindfulness with a couple. Are there any couples where you think, I just wouldn't go 100 miles near mindfulness with this couple, and maybe with one of them offering a kind of a sanctuary from the other person? Is there any contraindications of?
I think certainly there are couples who come with violence happening or major mental illness where this practice would be contraindicated, as it might elevate certain symptoms. Like I work with people who have had trauma, and they tend to dissociate a lot. And even though they begin with a lot of hesitation about sitting with me, closing their eyes, and are very frightened of the energy that begins to happen, I guess what I think about is when I'm working with couples and families, I say, you're here to learn something new, different ways of being, and you can do that at home. Actually, when I was first starting out as a family therapist, I worked with a family that was totally psychotic. The daughter was schizophrenic, and they came one night to the clinic where I was working, and there were 8 of them, and I walked in, little family therapist, all pumped up, and they wouldn't pay any attention to me. So I stood on the table in the middle of the room and tried to get their attention, and they were not paying attention. And so I kept doing all of these things. I went and got a newspaper, started reading. Anyway, I finally had to kick them out at the end of the night. And so I think there are families that are not interested in change, and there are families where you have to work very hard at kind of getting their attention. And, there are pros and cons to this process, the meditative dialogue process, and how it might work with them. They might be interested, intrigued, or they might just say, this is a bunch of hogwash and we'll try something else.
It seems there's two ways of looking at it, and one is that it could be a way of unbalancing, used as a way of unbalancing the dynamic between
yes.
them. Mm-hmm. It could also be used as offering somebody a completely new lifestyle and a way of using their minds and their brains in a very different way. Is that how you see it too, that it could be seen as either of these things?
Yes. I think it can become a really, I actually think people tend to be fascinated, a really fascinating resource for them to use and change their lives. And it certainly helps change their brains and interactions.
Some of the criticism of mindfulness is it's somebody at the Maudsley Hospital has just written about the idea that it can depersonalize people, can take away some of their existing personality, and somehow has an effect of dampening down the personality. Would you say that was one of the risk factors in using mindfulness?
That's funny, because my response to that is, wow, that's giving a lot of power to mindfulness. I do think that it certainly alters people's ways of being. And I guess one of the things that I think about, I certainly, dissociative aspect is one, which is kind of depersonalization, but I don't think it is that powerful to change people's personalities. It might give them more skills to dealing with things, so perhaps they're not as chaotic in their lives, and that might be a good thing. So I don't know. I've actually not read that, so I don't really know.
Something about the curiosity. I know curiosity is an interesting word, isn't it, within systemic practice, and encouraging curiosity. And I wonder if by introducing mindfulness, we're also opening a doorway to another form of religious practice in terms of some of the Buddhist traditions, for example, where people find stillness to be the thing that's sought for, or in internal dialogues ceasing to happen so much. Do you think that there's a likelihood that mindfulness is opening up those other forms of spiritual practice?
I do think so. It's more kind of in the Buddhist or Hindu tradition, and the idea that there is I think of it as a space. We're looking to go to the space between the breaths. We're looking to go to that point of stillness and oneness with the universe. And so what happens for me is a sense of kind of harmony within myself, within my clients, and between us, that perhaps has been difficult to find before. And comfort, trusting. I always say the best place that anybody can be is not knowing what's going to happen. Not being in control. We are never in control. We never have a sense of how our lives are going to play out, and that's exciting and terrifying at the same time. So that finding that point of stillness is a source of incredible strength. And I think of it as developing a sense of self in a small way, in a big way, small S, big S. And I always think of it being important to be able to just be.
So you seem to are kind of, there's always been a strong interest in the Western traditions with some of the Eastern traditions from the sort of 50s, 60s onwards, and Buddhism has been brought into psychotherapy in different forms, hasn't it, through existentialism?
Yes.
And where do you think the kind of modern, is it a kind of postmodern interest in stillness, because we've got such busy, frantic lives? Do you think there's something antidotal about mindfulness?
Absolutely. I actually, I have spent quite a bit of time in ashrams and India and Tibet and China, and what I was actually fascinated by, I'm always fascinated by how we kind of are looking for something. It's sort of like the grass is always greener. But when I was in Tibet, there's so much poverty, and they have so little. I had more in my backpack than they had in their whole world. And I watched one day a group of workers who were very, very happy, breaking stone down into sand to create bricks to build a building. And I thought, wow, what have we done? And isn't it fascinating that we're all traveling to Tibet to find something that they have, which seems like stillness, peace, oneness.
It's a kind of voluntary simplicity.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So in terms of Bateson's work, do you know much about Bateson's work? Gregory Bateson, he was reaching for something similar, wasn't he, when he spoke about nature and the natural world and man's relationship to those systems. Is that something that you've ever delved into or written about? Or
Well, I teach Bateson, and yes, I have written a little bit about it, but yes, I think Bateson was really looking for, he was basically developing theories of communication, and he was looking for how did the natural world operate, and a lot of our systems theory came from that. And of course, he was married to Margaret Mead, so they were traveling out there. But yeah, I do think a lot of what we end up working with has to do with the science of the natural world, and how one of the things that I've always been fascinated is Maturana's perturbing the eye of a frog with a puff of air, and seeing how that system responded. Um, and one of the things I love about family and couples work is I get to be the perturber. Love that.
Yes, that's right. That's right. To change the dynamic in some way, to see get them to step outside of it and to see what's going on.
Yes.
That's very much like the awareness tradition, isn't it? Of how can I make this person more aware of how they are or where they are.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. The other more kind of solid ground idea is going to the developmental psychology side, things like play, looking at play in the way that a lot of the writers like Winnicott had written about the importance of play in the relationship between the mother and child, but also you talk sometimes in your work about that the therapist offers that non-judgmental space for,
Yes.
for the adults to start to play more. So is that also, because you also talk about music and the musical dialogue between the client and the therapist and trying to attune to that?
I think, yes, a lot of the developmental work had to do with attunement, developing kind of spaces where people can align and rework. I think of it as music. I think of when I'm sitting with people, I think a lot of what's happening each session really is a piece of music, and our voices moving through space, and the things that are happening really are change processes that are beyond language. And so one of the things I think about with dialogue is it's really about developing the capacity to listen to the music that's there. And when I'm teaching, I say, we are the instruments here. You are the instrument, just like an actor. You are someone who can kind of stimulate change or facilitate change through your embodied self interacting with another embodied self. And I think a lot about how language really can't capture what we're trying to do. Yes, we speak, but that's not all we do. And I do think that people are beginning to pay attention to the somatic self and the kind of memories that are really stored in the body, and change processes that have to happen on that level. So music feels to me like something that can really move right in beyond language, and move people in different ways. And so really what I'm always trying to do is figure out ways to cultivate change processes, and whatever ways those are, I'll try. And so this was just this paper that's in the Journal of Family Therapy coming up is one that I wrote in kind of a whimsical way, trying to apply this meditative dialogue process and with music as a metaphor, as one of the ways to think about getting in there. And families really respond to that. They do become playful. And I think it makes things more spontaneous.
Yeah. So you're not suggesting that other family therapists or systemic therapists reading the article should just think of the metaphor of music is the one to hold to. It could be another art form or another idea
Yes, whatever is their way of being, I think. I think that certainly there are people who will respond to this, and there are people who will think it's kind of crazy, kind of fluffy.
So in terms of, I know you've said that you're more pro practice-based evidence, and that you're more of a creator in the therapeutic process. But what is out there in terms of the science behind your ideas and behind your ideas of meditative dialogue? Is there any science there, or is there going to be any science there that supports what you're doing?
There is none. I actually I don't have any energy for that, but somebody else certainly might.
Would you like to invite somebody? And yeah, then I mean, this hopefully when people see this podcast, they might think, "Great, I want to write this for my thesis."
That would be great. I actually had at one point thought about that, about working with the neurology people who are studying the brain and doing pre and post tests and looking at how things change in the practice. And, I do think it's certainly something that people can easily learn to do. And I've given a lot of workshops, and people have begun to practice and are telling me how it works. So certainly it's something that I think can be measured. And I did begin to think about that, but then I thought,
because you talk about the difference between spontaneity and improvisation, don't you? I think that's,
yes.
That's something I think is very, very interesting to me, but I'm sure other people might be interested in knowing what the difference is.
Well, spontaneity is kind of in the moment. I guess I would say a burst of playfulness, something happening out of the ordinary. And improvisation has a structure, has rules that are actually very similar to the meditative dialogue rules, structures. And so within a certain context, I don't, a lot of people go to a place called Second City here. It's in Chicago in the US, and it's an improv theater, and there are certainly rules. You begin with a kind of a little scene, and people begin to work off of each other, but within a certain form, which is very different. And there are spontaneous moments within that form, but improvisation has rules.
And do you think that the therapeutic relationship is like that much of the session is an improvisation, and then there comes the opportunity for a spontaneous moment from the client?
Yes, I do. I think that
you could put that in your own words.
Well, I think I actually wrote another article about the theater of therapy, and I think that we co-create this play together, where we're at the same time the actors, the story, and the audience of the play. And improv is happening, and then what we're looking for, I think, is the moments of spontaneity where change can happen. And it always happens, I think, the most profound changes happen by accident, without knowing, being willing to kind of, I think, dive off the cliff with someone and not know where you're going to land is when change happens.
And it's the therapist's job in a way to spot those moments, isn't it?
Yes.
To kind of amplify them for the clients in some way.
Yes, and often it's things will happen. Like I will have a thought, and I'll say, I have no idea where this is coming from, but this just came in, kind of news of something different coming in, and I have no idea what it is, but it's very moving for the client. It usually propels things. Or we'll have a moment of where I will make a mistake, and I'll say, "Oh, I'm really sorry, I made a mistake." And that'll last for years. People
Mm.
will take that and run with it because it's so healing for someone to say, the relationship matters more to me than my ego. I'm in this process with you.
And do you offer any training to people in your method, in meditative dialogue? Do you actually offer a specific training in it?
I do workshops at conferences, and I have people that I supervise. That's a form of training, but I don't have a canned training. So no.
Do you see that? Do you see that evolving, or do you see that as something?
Maybe, I don't know. It's all about how much time do I have?
And are you planning to come to the UK?
Yes, I am going to be speaking in September at the AFT conference at Kent, and getting excited actually about meeting all the people over there that I've been talking with for years and have never met, like you.
Yeah, I'll be there presenting too.
Great.
Doing something similar. What will the title of your workshop be there?
Oh, I wrote it down because I don't remember. The use of mindfulness and spirituality practices to help couples develop compassion and empathy for themselves and for each other.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So very, very much about this meditative dialogue that we've been discussing. And it's been great to meet you and find out more about your work. It's really wonderful. And I really look forward to seeing you in September.
Okay, thank you very much. It's been wonderful to talk with you.